Today we're shooting, tradition today, from beautiful Highland Forest County Park in Fabius, New York, part of the wonderful county park system in Onondaga County. This is the third part of a four-part series on the subject of the will of God. The last program we talked about the particular will of God. Now, the particular will of God means that God has a will for you, and He has a will for me, and He has a will for each and every individual human being on this earth, everyone that has ever been, everyone that is now and will ever be. God has a will for you which in some cases is shared by every single human being. For instance, God desires that you would know Jesus Christ, that you would know the forgiveness and the mercy, the grace, and the salvation that Jesus Christ offers us. I know that that's part of God's will for you because that's God's will for every human being. But at the same time, there is the particular will of God for you and for me that is different. Those two things are different. For instance, in 1983, when I met my wife, I actually met her in 1982, and I prayed to God, and I said, is this the person that I should marry? Is this the person that I should spend the rest of my life with? And as I prayed about that and sought God's will about that particular thing, I believe that He was saying yes, that was the one that He wanted me to marry. And then, of course, fortunately, it was also helpful that Donna said yes as well, and we were married back in October of 1983. This was God's particular will for me. That's not part of God's will for you, obviously. I mean, I might die and my wife might remarry, and it might be the will of God for someone else, but it's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely that that is anything to do with God's will for you. And there are parts of God's will for you that are different than God's will for me. So what I mean by the particular will of God, it's an individual thing. But now we're coming to the issue of the general will of God. And by the general will of God, I mean that there is a will of God that covers every single human being on the earth. It is the same for every single human being. It governs the lives of every human being on this earth. And in order to understand the general will of God, it is important for us to remember one word and one word only, and that word is freedom. Freedom. When we talk about the will of God, we're talking about two different perspectives. There is the perspective of looking ahead and asking ourselves, what is the will of God for us for the future? I just talked about that in terms of the particular will of God for individuals, but also for us as a nation, for us as a community, for us as a church, for us as human beings. This is incidentally the study of the philosophical study of ethics. When ethics is done right, it asks, what is the will of God? Of course, there are a lot of people who study ethics nowadays who aren't looking for the will of God, and they come up with a lot of foolishness. But if you're looking ahead, you're asking, what is the will of God for the future? Then the other perspective is to look behind and to say, how has the will of God been expressed in the things that have happened in the past? As we were talking about in the first part of this series, we ask that when we encounter certain tragedies in our lives, and we say, how could God have allowed that to happen? How could that have been God's will that that particular tragedy would occur, and so on? What we need to remember when it comes to the general will of God is that those things that are going to happen in the future are done in complete freedom by all of us. Every human being has complete ontological freedom, or spiritual freedom, you might say, complete spiritual freedom for what they do, what they are going to do at any particular time. And that in itself explains a lot about the things that have happened in the past, because the things that have happened in the past may not always exactly reveal to us the will of God, but it might just simply reveal to us the fact that human beings have freedom in what they do. Let me explain it to it this way. Suppose I say to myself, what am I going to do tonight? I'm at work, finishing up my day at work, and I say, I wonder what I'm going to do tonight. I could go to church. Maybe there's a liturgy at church. Maybe it's a feast day. There's a liturgy. I could go to church and then afterwards fellowship together with some other Christians a little bit. We go out for a cup of coffee or something like that, and then go home and spend the evening with my family or something like that. Or I could, rather than that, I could go to a bar with a bunch of the nincompoops that I work with, and we could go to a bar and we could sit there and watch one of these stupid sports bars, and I could watch football on a huge screen TV and drink beer and talk about stupid things with my stupid coworkers and get drunk and then go home later on after I've done all of those things. Well, now, I know what God wants me to do. I know which of those things God wants me to do. He wants me to do those things that are life-giving, life-affirming, that are according to His will. And then I also know what the devil wants me to do. I know that he wants me to do those things that are destructive of life, that appear to be wonderful, but which under the surface are revealed to be not wonderful at all, but filled with evil. The question is, which one of those am I going to choose? What am I going to choose to do? As I come to the end of my workday and I think to myself, well, which way am I going to go? Now, when I choose to follow whatever it is that the devil wants me to do, and I move in that direction, I unleash a series of events that sort of fans out from me and influences other people around me. Now, suppose I have those stupid people that I work with. Somebody really needs to sit down with some of those people and say, you know what? You lead a worthless life. You need to get your act together. You need to live a righteous life. You need to have a relationship with God and stop spending all of your time drinking and watching TV watching football on a big screen TV. Somebody needs to say that to them, but I choose not to. Instead, I'm going to encourage them. I'm going to say, hey, it sounds like fun. Yeah, let's go out to one of these sports bars and sit around and watch football on a big screen TV and get drunk and tell stupid stories and gossip and so on. I'm going to encourage them in doing that. So now my decision has an influence on that person. And maybe my decision also has an influence, let's say, on my family. And my family is waiting at home for me, and they're gathering around the dinner table, and my wife is preparing a dinner. And the kids say, where's Dad? Is he going to eat dinner with us tonight? Maybe my wife makes an excuse for me. He had to do something with some of the people at his work. So she's making an excuse for me, and I'm not there with my family. So now, again, my decision has an influence on my family as well. Okay, so it has an influence on my coworkers, it has an influence on my family. And then let's say I go to this, one of these stupid sports bars. They have 27 TVs and they're all playing different sporting events. I go to one of those places and I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink, and then I get in my car. Well, now all of a sudden I've influenced someone else. and I go out on the road, I've influenced my community. I've influenced other drivers. Perhaps I run into somebody else's car. I influence their life by damaging their property. Perhaps I even injure them, or perhaps I even kill somebody with my car. Because of that decision that I made, I make that one little decision. Yeah, I'm going to follow the devil tonight, and I'm not going to follow God. And that one little decision is like, how could I describe it? You're standing by the side of a calm body of water, a pond. You're standing by a pond, and you take a stone and you throw it into the middle of the pond, and it hits the water. And when it hits the water, those little waves go out from it. It's like that decision that you make, the little waves go out from it. Only thing is that the world that we have now is like a little pond with 1,000 people standing around the edge, and they're all throwing rocks, huge boulders and little rocks and sticks and dogs and car parts, and they're throwing things into the water, and the water's splashing all over the place. That's like the world that we have today. People are constantly making decisions that are against what God wants for them and for what the devil wants for them. Isn't it possible that somebody is going to get wet because of all that activity? Isn't it possible that somebody is going to get hurt because of all of that activity? I want you to imagine a group of, say, 100 people. You have 100 people, and 50 of them never do the will of God at all. They never follow the will of God. They don't even think about the will of God. 50 of them do the will of God sometimes. Maybe some of them do the will of God occasionally, and some of them do the will of God most of the time, but they only do the will of God occasionally. What are you going to have with that group of 100 people? You're going to have chaos is what you're going to have. You're going to have the world the way that we have the world today. Can you imagine if you had, if you were the manager of a staff of people, you had 100 people working for you, 50 of them never did what they were supposed to do, 50 of them only occasionally did what they were supposed to do. Maybe you had a few people who were really good at what they did. But can you imagine that? What if you were running a healthcare facility? That's not a healthcare facility I would want to go to. You know, stay away from that place if you're sick. What if you were manufacturing something? Whatever it is you're manufacturing, I wouldn't want to buy it. And if I bought it, I wouldn't want to use it. You wouldn't be able to get anything done. Now, I want you to take that group of 100 people, 50 of them never doing what they should, 50 of them occasionally, and let's say of the 50 that occasionally do what they should, there are some of them who really, really try. They work hard. They're good at what they do. They're very conscientious. They try their best to do their job properly. Now, those people, say if there's 1 or 2 or 5 of them, let's say there's 5%. Let's say those 5% of the people, they try to do their job. Are they going to, how would you say, hold up the organization? Maybe they're going to have an influence over the organization, but they of themselves cannot hold it together. When the ship goes down, they're going to go down with the ship. You see how that is? So that when we look at the will of God, when we talk about the general will of God, we need to remember, number one, that we have freedom, always freedom to do whatever we want to do, ontological freedom. And number two, that we live in community. What I do has an effect on you. What you do has an effect on me. I may never meet you in my life. I may never get to know you. You may never meet me, but still, the things that you do can have an influence on me and do have an influence on me. We don't know how it is that one little decision can affect so many other things. That the decision, the example I used about being at work, and I decide to go out drinking. I decide to follow what the devil wants me to do, and I go out drinking, and I get drunk, and I kill somebody with my car, and a family member of that person's family is never able to quite get over the fact that this happened. And years later, that person's life influences other people's lives. You see how it's like this wave that goes out. And so how is it that we can say that there are things that happen in this world that really aren't the will of God directly, but are only part of the general will of God? We can say that because we know that we have freedom, and that there are some times when things happen that really aren't according to God's will, when we do the things freely according not to God's will, but to Satan's will. So really, we can never say, I'm good. Why has something happened to me? Why did God make something bad happen to me? That really doesn't apply. When we say the will of God, if we remember the general will of God that all of us have freedom to do whatever it is that we want to do. And that's part of the will of God, that we have freedom, that we can choose, that that when we love Him because we have chosen to love Him and not because we love under compulsion. When we remember that, then it's obvious why it is that the world is a sinful place, why the world is a dangerous place. The world is a place that is characterized by suffering and death. Remember, what is the byproduct of sin? Suffering and death. Those are the only two things that sin brings about. There is no other byproduct, there is no other benefit of sin other than suffering and death. And so when we talk about the will of God in terms of the general will of God, the key to remembering that is we all have freedom to sin. And if we want to, we go ahead and do that. And very often we do. Now, some people say, when I teach on this, some people will say to me, but doesn't God have the ability to change things? Now, if I'm driving down the street, say you're driving down the street on the same night that I decided to follow what the devil wanted me to do, and I go to a stupid sports bar, and I watch TV, and I drink a whole bunch of beer, and I gossip with people from work, and I go out and get my car and I'm driving along. You're driving along too, and I'm driving down the street, drunk driver. Doesn't God have the ability to reach out His hand and push you out of the way and let me go by without running into anybody, or with only running into people who are bad, let's say? Let's say you're a good person. I know you're a good person because you're watching Tradition Today, right? And God is going to push you out of the way and let me go by. But then there's another person, and they're watching something else on TV tonight. Or no, I mean, they're a bad person, so God is going to let me run into them and kill them. Now, this is what people say sometimes, is that God can prevent things from happening. He can upend the laws of nature to help those who love Him. Well, let me tell you the way that works. The idea that I'm about to express, by the way, the insight that I'm about to express is not my own, but comes from Elder Paisius of the Holy Mountain. This is a book that all of you should get. If you're wondering why bad things happen to good people, don't buy the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Buy the book Elder Paisius of the Holy Mountain. He describes it much better than anyone else, ever has. Let me see if I can explain it the way he does. Supposing you have, you're a person who loves God. And so you submit yourself to God, you worship God, you allow your life to be, you give your life to God. And as a result of giving your life to God, you never get sick. And you get a lot of money. And your children become beautiful and smart. And your car never breaks down. And your house renews itself year by year without you doing any repairs, and so on and so forth. Then you have your next door neighbor. Let's say your next door neighbor uses his ontological freedom to reject God. He says, I will not believe in God, and I will not submit to God, and I will not worship God, and I don't want anything to do with God. And so as a result of that, he gets sick. He gets some terrible disease, and he's suffering with this disease. And he's laying in bed, and he can't sleep, And he gets up one night and he walks over to the window and he looks out his window at your beautiful house and your beautiful car. And he knows that you're in there sleeping the sleep of the righteous. And he just says to himself, I can't stand it anymore. And the next morning he comes over to your house and he says, fine. Tell me how I can submit my life to God. Tell me how I can worship God. Tell me how I can become a Christian. And you say to him, well, you come to church, come to confession, get baptized, take Holy Communion, begin to read the Bible and pray and things like this. And he's writing them down. Yeah. What else? Well, fast during the fasts of the church. Yeah. Okay, fast. I got it. Blah. Tithe, 10% of, tithe. Yeah. And he writes them all down, and then he starts to do them. And why does he start to do them? He starts to do them because he can't stand the pain anymore. Not because he loves God. Well, I wonder, how does God judge that? What would God do to somebody who outwardly seems like he is doing everything that a good Christian would do, but inside he really doesn't believe in God? He hates God, as a matter of fact. How would God judge somebody like that? It would be impossible. You see, what God desires of us is real love. Love that comes from, not from the circumstances around you, but from your heart. That you know that he's there and you turn your life to him and you love him. And even if you're sick and in pain and your family has troubles and your job is terrible and your house falls down and your car never seems to work, even if all of those things happen, you still love God. And you don't love him only because you think that he's going to make everything better, but you love him no matter what the circumstances. You see how this is? If God was to take all of the righteous people and make their lives perfect, it would make the lives of unrighteous people completely unlivable. They would not be able to live because they would either need to do what they want to do, which is not believe in God, or they would need to submit themselves to God, not out of love, but out of anger. That would especially be the case, of course, if a person's, not only if a person was sick, but what if his child was sick? What if your next door neighbor's child became sick? How could he stand there saying, I'm going to continue to reject God even though my child is sick? No, he's never going to say that. He's going to say, whatever I need to do, whatever I need to kiss, whatever I need to bow down before, whatever I need to give money to, I'll go ahead and do that so that my child can get better. You see, this is the reason that we have the general will of God. The general will of God, which sometimes we could call the laws of nature. You know, if a Christian jumps off of a skyscraper he's going to hit the pavement the same as a non-Christian. This is what we call the laws of nature, the general will of God. This is the fact that we have freedom. And the freedom means that when you love God from your heart and not out of necessity, not out of compulsion, not out of anger. Well, we've talked today a little bit about the will of God from the perspective of the general will of God. Next week we'll be talking about the eternal will of God. And now, we all seek to do the will of God, both you and me, and I hope that for you, at least next week, part of the will of God will be that you join us again for Tradition Today.
Well, this is a museum which traces the path of Orthodoxy, the journey of Orthodoxy to America. It was established to show the roots of the Orthodox Church in America. This museum was set up by Father John Parrish, and the initial entry point has exhibit of various artifacts, costumes, cultural traditions of different peoples who have came to America, and it represents Ellis Island, which was the entry point for many of the people who did come to America, especially at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, when most of the Orthodox people came to America. The section on Alaska shows some of the artifacts, cultural artifacts and traditions of the Alaskan Native people, the Eskimos, the Aleuts, the Indians. St. Tikhon's Monastery is the oldest Orthodox monastery in America. It was founded in 1905, and it's in the village of South Canaan in northeastern Pennsylvania. The founder of our monastery, St. Tikhon of Moscow, Patriarch of Moscow, and founded this monastery in 1905. His Mantia, when he was Metropolitan of Moscow, is here in the monastery. Similarly, we have vestments from St. Nikolai of Zicha, the Serbian bishop, who was rector of the seminary. The section on showing the celebration of the Lenten Holy Supper prior to the celebration of the vigil service for the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ shows what a typical home in Carpatho, Russia, or in the Ukraine might look like prior to that Holy Supper meal, which a family would share together before going to church. If people are interested, and they're certainly welcome, we have this exhibit here because we want to share these things. The icon repository was built in 1995. It was a gift to the seminary by Mr. John Guzzi. It was built behind the old monastery bell tower. It's a collection of icons, 400 icons in it, the collection, many from Russia, many from the 19th century, but there are also some from the 17th century, from the 18th century, and there are also from other countries, from Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia. There are 2 icons from Syria, from Dalmatia. There's a Coptic icon. So it's quite a varied collection, and the oldest icon is from the 15th century. There are also 17th century, 18th century icons.